So if you remember, about a week or two ago, we discussed this idea that I had for a reactive framework for Python. The idea being that you would never have to use something like React or Vue or Svelte for a front end, and you could just use Python for your front end, so that then you could have a reactive framework and use everything that you want for most basic applications. Great. That seems awesome. And I liked the concept specifically because when I looked it up, it didn't seem like as if there were any concepts around for that at the time. I had asked Google Gemini and I had also asked ChatGPT, and both of which didn't find any reactive frameworks. So at the time, I thought that this would be great for me to hone my own skills. I was pretty confident in those reactive frameworks, and I knew they were just JavaScript, and I figured I could do something with WebSockets and do something cool so I could have a reactive framework with just using Python and Flask, because I really like Flask. And about 13 hours later, I find out that there is a reactive framework called Flask Meld. So I say to myself, okay, if there is a reactive framework, maybe all the work I did won't go to waste. I did multiple different things in that 13-hour span, like being able to make a component builder for specific elements that could be reactive. I was able to add a WebSocket from the front end and back end so that therefore these component elements would be able to talk to each other. I was able to make it so that you could have an if and else statement flag so that you could have reactive elements or component blocks be able to be visible. So there was a lot that I did there, and I wanted to be able to at least add something useful to Flask Meld. And when I look into Flask Meld, I start to ask myself, what things should I keep with Flask Meld and maybe add? Or what things should I break up? One of the things I did is create a way to run Python in HTML. And if you saw my last video, you would see how that fully worked. But essentially, I was able to hijack that render template engine from Flask so that I could be able to read everything that's coming in and be able to parse the information and see if there's a specific tag that I had set, so that therefore any code inside of there could be able to be run with Python, right? And there's some extra oddities that I speak about in my last video about that. But essentially, I had to make a decision to myself. Is it useful to have this feature in Flask Meld? Or is it useful to have this feature as a standalone product, a standalone extension that you can add to Flask, so that if you wanted to therefore have the convenience of adding your code directly to the HTML, you can. And I came up with the decision of making this its own extension. So yes, I'll work on Flask Meld later and see what things I can add to it. But this one thing that I want, this ability to be able to run Python right from an HTML file, I figured would be useful as its own extension. So I start thinking of the ideas of how to be able to separate this, and one of the things I come across is the naming convention. Because of course, one of the hardest things in programming is actually naming something, really. People make that as a joke, but it's kind of true. It's very difficult to be able to name something in languages that makes it conventional and of ease of use for other people who may pick this up, especially if this is open source. So I work with ChatGPT and the actual PyPI, or the Python Package Index website, to see what things are available. And the one thing that kind of works that seems to be available is Flask Embed. You would think Flask HTML would work, but unfortunately that doesn't, because it's already available and it's supposed to be for HTML generation, which the project I did in my last video kind of covers already, and it does it a little bit better in my opinion. But regardless, this person already has the name Flask HTML, so I decided I'm going to try to find something completely unique. And the first unique thing I found was Flask Embed. It kind of makes sense. I'm embedding Python directly into an HTML file, and you can run it, so it makes sense. So for the concept of what I'm doing, it's actually quite simple. I'm using a class, and in this class, I'm going to use the Flask render template function. With this class, I'm going to be able to initialize a couple different things that I want, but there's going to be a function that specifically is going to basically take the render template function as its ending result. The main idea being is that I can read the information before the render template takes a hold of it and be able to do whatever I want with it. Because I was already able to do this in my last video, I basically copy and pasted over the actual information into this new project with a couple different details. For one, I changed the name of Flask to Flask, so that therefore if you have a tag that says Flask, you could be able to use that tag for outputting code. I removed the if and else reactive components because that would require a WebSocket, and I'm not adding that to this extension. And then I made it so that the actual code can be placed on the screen. The way I would do that is that if you have an output variable that is specified in your Flask tag, it would be read in and be placed in a Flask output tag as well. So if you have a Flask output tag, that's where it would be placed, and then you can be able to do whatever you want from there. And so the concept is really just of convenience, and it's a test. It can be added with more things, but essentially it's the idea of, instead of putting your code in a Python route, you could put your code directly in the HTML file. Because your Python code is still going to be read before the actual HTML is rendered, you can basically place it in the route or within the HTML file. And placing it within the HTML file is just ease of use and convenience. Now, if you wanted to therefore place whatever variable or output you want, you can use this specific tag that I've placed so that you can be able to, let's say, get an API result and then be able to place that on the screen. And so this extension is kind of cool, but it's really just ease of use. All of this stuff is available by just you writing the Python code into the route itself and then piping that information over to the Ninja template engine. Once it's sent back to Flask through the render template engine function that they have, it's basically the same code as before. And so it's a cool concept, but you can actually expound upon it. For example, I was thinking about making it so that the tag for Flask output would be something like a star or a variable that can be added to the after part of it. And therefore I can look for something where if something says Flask whatever, it will automatically put that into the actual HTML. So if you wanted to have everything directly in your actual HTML file and you just wanted to write your Python at the top, your HTML at the middle, your JavaScript maybe at the bottom if you wanted to do that, whatever, just like Svelte or Vue, you can do such. And it gives you more actual ease of use. So it's an interesting concept because it's just a standalone, but combined with something like a reactive framework, this can be extremely powerful. Think about it. You have this idea where now you can write your code just at the top, just like Svelte or Vue, where you can now have a Flask tag where you can write your Python in. It does things, but it's reactive this time using something like Flask Meld. And then from there, you could be able to then implement any code you want really in Python, knowing the fact that it's going to be reactive. You can use databases, you can use a bunch of other things and features and tools that you're used to. So that's it for this video. If you liked the video, please leave a thumbs up. If you want to subscribe, please subscribe. And if you have any questions, concerns, anything, please feel free to reach me in the comments below. I'll be sure to see it and reply back. Or you can reach me on my social medias, which will be in the description below. And other than that, I hope the rest of your day goes well. Peace, everyone.